Needs $700,000. On November 6, 2015, a Reddit user named Bangarang made a deeply concerning and odd post on the site reading, "Need $700,000. What do? I need it by January 2016 or I'm dead from the mob. What are my options though?" Now, if this was posted in subreddits like r/advice or r/helpme, people would have taken it more seriously. However, for whatever reason, Bangarang decided to post this plea for help in r/sadboys. This is a subreddit for the fans of the Sad Boys music collective that emerged in the early 2010s, primarily associated with Swedish rapper Young Lean and his music group Sad Boys. So, a completely unrelated post like this left most people confused about what it meant. Not sure if this is real. So confused. What is this? Some users wondered if this was some obscure reference to Sad Boys music. Is this a reference to Lean being worth $700,000? However, most users quickly realized that Bangarang was serious when he began responding to some of the less serious joke comments with sincere replies. "Let me ghostwrite your next mixtape. I need all the help I can get." But that's when the post took a disturbing turn. One user jokingly told the OP to end it by jumping off a bridge and shoot himself while falling. However, instead of getting offended, Bangarang replied with something that made everything way more unsettling. "Think they'll get to me before I can make any moves." Alongside this, he posted a link to an eerie photo, a group of men standing in the middle of a street with multiple cars lined up behind them. The way the photo was framed suggested that OP took it while hiding in the bushes, as if he was watching from a distance, afraid to be seen. At this point, people wanted answers. And after some back and forth in another thread, Bangarang finally explained what had gotten him into this situation. "Was involved in a fight where an 18-year-old kid was killed. I was on drugs and had a bad temper. I was always protective of my friends, especially John. John was in a band and was taking off. He had a Facebook page, so he deactivated it. He made a new one. One of his friends that made a new one got real mad that he deleted the old page and thought he didn't want anything to do with her or his old friends because of the new fame and band. John tried to explain to her that wasn't the case. When he tried to, I peered over John's shoulder, read their texts, and got heated. I started trash-talking the girl. She got her boyfriend's friends to meet me and my friends out in the desert for a brawl. One of the guys there was with the gang members' guys group and pulled out a gun to shoot me and my friends. One of my friends grabbed the gun from him and ended up shooting the guy and killing him, the dude that pulled out the gun in the first place. Then, after the fight, I violated my probation. The cops were already after me for drug use. They found out I was involved in the fight and the shooting of the guy, and they added the battery charge. I wasn't charged with murder, but was involved in the fight, which is why they added assault and battery charges, plus the probation violation. But I continued with drug use and violated my probation by leaving the state. Now I'm sobered up, I just turned 23, and I'm in a real bad place with some people from the past. While these responses provided some important context for OP's situation, it still didn't explain why the mob was after him now, or how having $700,000 would help him stay alive. By this point, people had stopped joking. It was clear that this was most likely real. One user finally spoke up, saying what everyone else was thinking. "First of all, why are you posting this here? Second, run, get out of town." To which OP replied, "I got no one." After learning about his sheer helplessness, user PizzaMan2345 chimed in with some detailed and practical advice to help Bangarang escape with his life. "Get yourself into jail and tell them to safely escort you to an airport afterwards. If you warn them about the mob and spread the word, the police will look stupid if you die soon afterwards. Then, if you do get to the airport, take several planes to several places and settle down somewhere far away. No matter how uncaring a police department is, they should listen to your plea for help. It might also help if you have a writer friend who can tell the whole story if they don't escort you. Let the police know, as a last resort, that they will be flamed online for not dealing with the mob themselves and for letting you loose, only for you to die right after. This of course involves you being in jail for a while, which if not the case leads me to say that you should simply leave the country now. Use your head, don't drug your problems away, either work hard and loan the rest or just run." Unfortunately, we'll never know if this advice helped him or not. A day after making the original post, Bangarang stopped replying to any more comments and hasn't posted anything on Reddit since. As for if the story was legit or not, we have no way of knowing for sure. The Bangarang account was likely a throwaway since it was created the same day as the post. I also tried reverse image searching the picture he posted, and while there are many similar looking images online, I couldn't find anything that matches the OP picture to a T and predated the Reddit thread. And since Bangarang didn't provide any clues about his location, I couldn't find any relevant news articles from that time either. Most users under the original thread believe the OP was likely caught and killed by the mob. However, it's been over 9 years since the original post with no updates since, and I doubt we'll ever learn the truth. Dog Operation. On the 31st of March, Reddit user City, posted a disturbing entry on the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit. The title of the entry was, "What could have been the reason why someone operated on my dog?" It read, "I originally posted this to another sub, now deleted, and was insisted that I repost this here instead. I live alone in a suburban area, and when I go out, whether it's for work, social gatherings, shopping, or whatever, I leave my dog, he's a Labrador, to play in my backyard with plenty of food and water. He's a pretty healthy dog, normal weight, and had nothing wrong with him. I would say I live in a pretty safe neighborhood and never had anything bad happen to my dog while I was away. Yesterday, I came back home from work in shock to see that my dog had been stitched up. In shock, I immediately rushed to him, called and took him to a vet. I visited the vet for checkups, so the vet knows him. Strangely, the doctor who was inspecting him said that whoever was operating on him actually did a pretty good job and for whatever reason took out part of his fat. The wounds are of both his lower and upper belly, pictures here. Luckily, he isn't in any danger, but the doctor said he would be in some pain for some weeks, normal for wounds. I was prescribed painkillers and antibiotics for my dog. I was also given a cone for him to wear so he wouldn't lick his wounds. Naturally, I asked him if a Labrador came into the vet today, as in yesterday, and he and the receptionist said no, and they said to their memory it's the first time they saw my dog that day. So this got me and my doctor thinking, either someone operated on him or someone took him to another vet and got him operated for whatever reason. In the meantime, I have reported this to the police and have called other vets around my town and no luck as of yet. Due to this, I am still unsure what could have caused this. Who and why would someone take parts of fat out of my dog? I don't have any enemies nor any past relationship partners come to mind who may do this. I've also spoken to some neighbors and they said they didn't notice anything strange around the neighborhood or near my house. I also don't have any cameras. People on Reddit quickly began speculating on what could have happened. Some wondered if this was the work of a medical student looking to practice or a budding serial killer. However, neither of these makes much sense. No sane medical student would risk ruining their career by operating on a random dog when there are safer options like ethically sourced cadavers. As for the potential serial killer theory, why would they cut open a dog only to stitch it back and return it to the owner instead of just disposing of the body? But there were some more reasonable theories as well, stating that the dog must have injured its stomach while jumping over the fence. Someone then saw the wounded dog and took it to the vet for treatment before leaving it back in OP's yard. Or maybe the dog successfully jumped over the fence only to get hit by a car, and the person driving the car took it to the vet and dropped it off after the operation. However, a major flaw in both theories is why the person who took it to the vet didn't leave a note explaining the situation. If it was an accident, maybe the person didn't want to get in trouble. But even then, leaving an anonymous note would have been the right thing to do. Some users also consider the possibility that someone might have shot the dog with a pellet gun, either by accident or on purpose. A comment from user Banana Phone quickly rose to the top as it offered a more plausible explanation for what might have happened during the OP's absence. That rubber thing sticking out appears to be a Penrose drain, which is most commonly used to allow a wound to weep and drain through the hole where it comes out of the skin, which prevents the skin from closing into a pocket and turning into a huge infected abscess, which requires secondary treatment and antibiotics. This is most commonly seen in my personal professional experience after bites from another animal, as the bacteria in dog/cat mouths can be difficult to totally disinfect after the fact and often leads to abscesses. While the general consensus is that dog mouths are cleaner than cats, there's still plenty of bacteria in your average dog's mouth that could lead to infection. That drain will need to be removed in a few days to a week after the risk of infection is passed. My guess would be, with the size of the incision, another dog got into a fight with yours, whether it jumped the fence into your backyard and picked the fight itself, or somehow your dog was accidentally able to be out of his fence, and the owner felt guilty but did not want to get sued or put their dog down. I double this hypothesis because if they put him back, they knew where he lives, and that means he was probably inside the fence when the incident occurred, and hiding the conflict probably means his dog has a history of aggression, to the point where it jumped your fence and attacked. I suspect a pellet/gunshot less because anyone who would shoot a dog in its own yard is probably not going to have the moral compass to get it treated. Another user, Decent Writer, also backed this theory with a personal anecdote reading, "I'm almost 100% sure someone who has a dog with a bite history attacked your dog and they did not want to get caught. I have a dog with a bite history. If he bit someone or an animal a second time, it would be disastrous, and myself and my partner would both be in jail. They likely got off with a small charge the first time and are on probation, already paid out a ton of money to whoever was the first victim and cannot risk a second person suing them. We've been going through the process for our one dog bite for over 2 years. It has been miserable every single step of the way, and I'm sure that's what has happened here. I'm sorry, it sucks so much. Hopefully they feel guilty and come forward to you one day. in which case you have 2 years from the day of the incident to sue them in a civil court case. I know this because I'm on the other side of that civil lawsuit as we speak. That said, after further questioning from other users, the OP shared additional details about the situation, debunking many of these theories in the process. Edit. People have been asking about my fencing. I am about 5'8", and the main fencing is taller than me. The side fence is about half my height. However, there are other properties around those fencing. So if another dog, for example, got in, I would think the neighbors would have noticed, as the other dog would have needed to go through their properties first before reaching mine. People also are asking if my dog is known for jumping over stuff. No, he's not. So that's why I don't think he hurt himself while jumping over the fence. But that doesn't mean another dog jumped over to him. One of my neighbors, right next to the one of my shorter fence, has a dog of his own. But it's a small poodle, and I don't think they could have done that to a Labrador. Plus, neither of them has shown aggression to each other, from what I've seen. They usually don't even pay each other's mind. No other organs are missing, according to the vet, just the fat removal. It was not a car crash. He has no bones broken, bruises, or anything like that. There was blood, but only around him, normal amount, not anything crazy. So either someone did it and cleaned it, or it was done elsewhere. The picture was taken the day after the vet, the day I made this post, after they examined and gave him a proper clean around the wounds. At least one of my neighbors in the surrounding fencing has a camera, to my knowledge. The footage has been examined by the police and myself, and we couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. The police said they will be going around to see for any other footage. However, with this additional information, the OP mentioned something that made many people question whether any of this was real to begin with. They mentioned that they were gone out for work from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. for 5 hours, which is not typically enough time for someone to take their dog to a vet, get a complete surgery, and drop it back without getting caught. As one user pointed out, "This whole thing strikes me as suspicious. I've worked in both private practice and ER. OP says they were gone for 5 hours. Even if it happened right when they left, 5 hours is a really short amount of time for this size of wound repair when you factor in anesthesia, sedation, clipping, cleaning. Sometimes takes longer than the actual suturing to remove hair, debris, dirt, etc., then flushing and cleaning the wounds, cutting the skin to remove sections that wouldn't heal well, then actually suturing it, including drains, post-anesthesia/sedation recovery. White dogs plus a bunch of blood requires a bath to remove all the blood. Not to mention the time it takes to get the dog there, check the dog in, get consent for treatment, discharging and explaining meds, paying for it, getting the dog back to OP's yard. But this makes me wonder if it could have been done in this time frame if the surgery wasn't done at a professional veterinary hospital. Maybe the person involved in the incident had a surgical background and did everything themselves off the books. However, this is all speculation, and unfortunately not long after this update, the OP deleted their account and didn't post any new updates on what happened. But before that, the OP did make a post stating that the police were investigating this as a criminal case. However, given their complete silence over the past 4 years, it's unlikely we'll learn if anything ever came of that. Fraudulent nurse. On January 16, 2021, user Pagan Princess 22 made a Reddit post recounting her strangely terrifying experience at a hospital. The post read, "A woman posing as a nurse stole my blood from an Indiana, USA emergency room in 1996 or 1997 when I was 5 or 6 years old. Hello everyone, I'm not sure if this is the correct place, so please feel free to direct me to a better subreddit if there is one. I've flared it as a cold case because it happened 23 years ago, but there were no charges filed, to my recollection, and I don't remember a case being made from it. This is a strange story, and I was 5, maybe 6 when it happened, so I don't have a lot of the details. I had recently told my younger sister about this story, and she encouraged me to look into the incident more and see if I could find out either who this person was or if there was a larger pattern of behavior during the time frame. I'm interested in any information you all have to offer / can find on the matter, as I truly just want to satisfy some curiosity. I'm 99% sure any statute of limitations is up, and I'm not interested in reporting something so weird and from so long ago to the police for them to tell me there's nothing that can be done. Now onto the story. When I was around 5 or 6, I got a pretty bad nosebleed that wouldn't stop. I eventually started throwing up big clots of blood as well, and my mother took me to the ER. This would be in / around the Sunman or Indianapolis area in Indiana, USA, but I do not know the name of the hospital. At the time, beds were separated only by curtains on ceiling racks and not individual walled rooms. My mother had left my room to speak to a doctor. I know she left, and a woman I did not know came in shortly after she left. She was white, had medium brown hair, and looked to be in her 20s or 30s. She was wearing a blue scrub shirt with puppy dogs on it and unmatched pants. I want to say she was not wearing scrub pants, but rather jeans or maybe sweatpants. I know they did not match her shirt, which stood out to me. The other nurses and doctors I saw only wore solid colored scrubs and were all matched. She said she needed to take some blood and pulled the tools to do so from her scrub pockets, not a phlebotomy card. She stuck me and started drawing blood, somewhere around 5 to 7 vials of it, but potentially more. On the last vial, we heard my mom and a doctor coming back towards the room. She hurriedly ripped the tube from my arm before the last vial was full. It spilled some blood. She did not give me a band-aid or gauze. She just left me bleeding and shoved everything back into her pocket, then ran from the room. She ran to the left, and my mom and doctor entered from the right. The doctor said a nurse would be with me soon to draw some blood and run some tests. I told him a lady had already taken my blood, and he asked what she looked like and where she went. I described her. He turned wide-eyed to my mother and said, "She doesn't work here," and ran out of the room to the left. I heard some loud voices, there was a lot of commotion, but I don't remember anything past that point other than just feeling dizzy and now scared that some strange woman had my blood. I've never been able to find out what happened, who this woman was, and if she was ever caught, or if this type of thing was happening across the country at the time. I have no idea. Let me know if there's any other information I could provide to make it easier to find out what happened to my blood. Edited a typo and to add, my mother is not a great source of information when it comes to my early life, or her life, or anything really, as she has some of her own issues. Several years ago, when I was a teenager, confirmed the details I remembered, then refused to talk further about it and asked me not to bring it up again. She claims she does not remember the name of the hospital, the name of the doctor, or other details I was asking for at the time. What makes this story so terrifying is how real it feels. Most children are already afraid of doctors and needles, so the idea of someone posing as a nurse to steal blood is horrifying. One user responded with a theory stating, "Are there any chances that you are adopted?" suggesting that the mysterious woman was OP's real mother who wanted her blood for DNA testing. And while this is still a bit out there, it could explain why OP's mother refused to give any further information on what happened that day. However, OP shot down this theory not long after it was posted with a comment reading, "I don't believe so, no. I've seen my original birth certificate and it lists my known parents as my birth parents. I also look very similar to my mom and sister." The most plausible theory came from user OSnapdragon22, who suggested that OP might be misremembering details that make this situation a lot more horrifying than it actually was, stating, "Nurse here, phlebotomists sometimes wear different scrubs. It seems highly unlikely that someone stole your blood and put them in tubes. Those tubes are full of various additives for different diagnostic testing. If I were to steal your blood, I would use a bag instead, not like I would steal blood or anything, just making a point. It seems highly weird that a civilian would have the necessary tools/tubes to complete this lab draw. Many blood draws are done with equipment carried in scrub pockets, so not having a cart is not atypical. Supplies in hospitals, especially needles, are required to be locked per Joint Commission/DNV for obvious reasons, drug users, children. Also, blood draw carts are actually an infection risk in some cases. Lastly, hospitals are extremely stranger-unfriendly. Every nurse and tech knows who's supposed to be there and who's not. Even when you're a coworker that has been floated from another floor to assist, you are treated as an outsider, and many coworkers still stop and ask you what you need/what you're doing there. This was most likely a flashbulb memory instance, as you were 5 and have a childlike recollection of events, and said yourself that your family/parent is a poor historian. I hope this provides some reassurance for you. I'm not trying to diminish what you're saying, just mentioning that from my experience it seems highly implausible. P.S. A doctor saying someone doesn't work? That is also ridiculous, as doctors do rotations, don't stay on one floor permanently, and typically do not know all staff members working in a given unit at a time. Pagan Princess 22 is still fairly active on Reddit, but she hasn't posted any new information about her story. Who knows, maybe one day her mother will come clean about what she knows and we'll finally learn what happened to OP on that day. Poisoned. On May of 2013, a user made a chilling confession on the Off My Chest subreddit with a disturbing title that read, "My mother has poisoned me. Ever since I became an adult about a decade ago, my mother has been against me moving out of the house. I finally got a job as a line cook 3 years ago. My mother and the rest of my family, which includes my sister and father, has been against it, mainly saying that such a job cannot sustain me," which was true. They also said I would hate working, which turned out to be false. About a year and a half later, I quit due to health reasons. The following spring, I got a new job as a computer programmer. While they seemed supportive at first, my mother and sister, who I lived with, gradually became hostile. Eventually, I moved out of the house. About a month later, I lost my job, and about 3 months later, moved back home. Everything was cool at first, but as I was getting calls from recruiters and going to job interviews, they gradually became more hostile again, accusing me of being distant and not caring for them. However, they seemed to be very controlling and hateful of the fact that I wanted to move out and wanted a decent job. So last month, I finally got that job as a computer programmer again, but it was out of town. I had just enough money to relocate to the new city. They became very hostile starting a few days before I left, accusing me of not loving them, of hating them. On the day before I was scheduled to leave, my mother gave me 2 of the styrofoam ramen noodle cups and tore that cardboard covering that normally comes with it and threw it away. I was suspicious that they would try to sabotage my life, so I was careful in not trying to anger them. She gave me a few more food items, which I didn't use, to take on the trip with me. When I arrived at my new city and entered my hotel room, I chilled out. I was to go to work the next day, so after the first day of work, I ate a cup of ramen noodles and felt ill. I knew that feeling because my sister fed me something that made me feel the same way in late 2011, which I then assumed was because of my recent illness. I felt weak, lightheaded, and short of breath. I drank water to make me feel better because that's what I did last time that happened to me. Over the week, my mother kept calling me, making sure to remind me to eat my ramen noodles. I was short on cash then, waiting for my first paycheck. I never told her that I ate it. I suspected then that I had been poisoned, and after doing some Googling, believed it was cyanide. Now, that is something that you should never have to think that your own mother would do that to you. So I resisted that thought because I simply could not bear to think that. So I went to cyanidetest.com and ordered a kit, and I tried it. Now, look at the graphics and the video on this page. Now, here are the results of my test. I guess I'm going to have to call the cops, and I will never speak to my family again. The results exposed the truth the OP desperately didn't want to believe. He was being poisoned by his own family. Thankfully, the amount of poison in 1 cup of noodles wasn't enough to be lethal, but eating that second cup could have easily delivered a fatal dose. Luckily, he was able to escape with his life. After reading this post, the vast majority of people urged OP to contact the police and stay away from his family, and that's exactly what he did. Unfortunately, the police weren't as helpful as everyone would have hoped. Update 8:45 a.m. I am currently in Topeka, Kansas. I work downtown in a government office building which has a police department. I visited the Capitol Police Station here and spoke to an officer. I showed him the evidence and he said he could do nothing about it since the package was opened and might have been contaminated. So does anyone have ideas? Had things ended here, this could have gone down as one of the most unsettling mysteries in Reddit's history. But unlike other disturbing Reddit threads, this one surprisingly had somewhat of a conclusion. You see, even though this was a throwaway account, OP returned to Reddit in October of 2013 and gave an update on his whereabouts. I was only able to file a police report, but only that so far. The police do not have enough evidence to investigate. I've gotten no contact with my family. I currently live in a cheap motel in Topeka, Kansas. Yesterday, after getting home from work, I work for the Kansas state government as a software developer. The lady at the front desk told me that my mother called them to speak to me. For security reasons, the motel needs both the name and room number, and my mother didn't have my room number. She didn't even attempt to call my cell phone, which makes me believe that she just wanted to know if I was staying there and where. And a few months later, he posted one last comment assuring everyone of his safety. And by the way, I have moved out of state since making my last thread with this account, and am doing very well with a nice job, and am in better health. To think that this story would have taken a much darker turn if the OP hadn't grown suspicious of the food his own family gave him on his way out. Missing coworker. On the 31st of July 2020, Reddit user SoothBB made a post on the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit seeking clues to help locate their missing coworker. The post read, "On Wednesday, July 22, a coworker of mine abruptly up and left work before the end of his shift and hasn't been seen since. 1 week later, a text message is received from him containing only 3 photos. Does anyone recognize the locations shown in these photos? I work in a lab that makes prescription eyeglasses in northern Ohio. Last week Wednesday, about 6 hours into our 10-hour shift, around 7:10 p.m., a coworker of mine got up from his station in a hurry, left his bag with personal belongings at his desk, iPad, Bluetooth headphones, a prescription, phone charger, a book, and a couple other knickknacks, and walked out the door and didn't return. No one's seen him since. Some of my other coworkers thought he was just sick of the long hours and decided to quit, but that just doesn't make sense why he'd leave behind his personal belongings and not say anything. We tried calling him that same night, but his phone would just ring until it went to voicemail, and by the next morning his phone was turned off. My boss said he got a hold of his mom and that she hasn't seen or heard from him, but didn't seem too concerned as she said he had a history of living somewhat of a nomadic lifestyle in his past. She thinks he may have relapsed and owed someone money or just ran off with some girl. Apparently they aren't very close and don't have the best relationship. I know he had a history of drug abuse, but from everything I've gathered in the 2 years that I've worked with him, he cleaned his life up after an arrest in 2014 or 2015 for drug possession and had been clean since. He always acted normal around me and seemed to be living a productive life. On the subject of the pictures, a couple days ago after work, I received a group text message that was sent to me, 2 of my other coworkers, and 6 other numbers I don't recognize. It was from him and contained the 3 pictures I linked, no text. I tried calling and it rang once then went to voicemail. When I called again, it went straight to voicemail. This whole thing has me feeling very uneasy and I don't know what to think. Does anybody here recognize the location of where these photos might have been taken? Below this was an Imgur link to these 3 pictures that OP supposedly received from their coworker. All 3 of these pictures looked like someone had taken them in a hurry while possibly running away from someone or something. If the OP's story was true, it painted a deeply alarming situation. However, most users remained skeptical, and as time passed, more evidence emerged suggesting that this might be a hoax or part of an alternate reality game. $5 says this turns out to be an ARG. For instance, one user tried to extract the embedded data in the 3 images to see if they had any GPS information, only to be met with confusion. I tried extracting the first picture's EXIF data. It says it was shot on iPhone on 7/7/2017, 1322. It looks like the photos are in the early morning or night. Do you think the 1322 time is right? 3 years ago also. Interesting. A few other users also pointed out significant inconsistencies in how the OP described the location, stating, "Yeah, I'm not a fan that they just said Northern Ohio. Like, is it Cleveland, Akron, Toledo, Sandusky? Way too broad. Same, I'm from Toledo and no one ever refers to Northern Ohio. Northwest Ohio, yes. Northern Ohio raised a flag for me too. I'm from Akron and no one says that. For us it's Northeast Ohio." A few months later in November, SoothBB returned to Reddit with a new update and somehow things had grown even more mysterious than they were the last time. I wish I could say we found him or at least closed up any loose ends, but I can't. Shortly after the thread was closed by the mods, a police report was indeed filed. However, in mid-September, I was one of several people that were laid off from the lab we were working at, so if there were any updates on his case after that time, I'm not aware of them. I've done several searches of his name since I left the company to see if any media outlets reported on him, but I personally haven't been able to find anything. The OP also attempted to deny the allegations that the whole thing was made up. Understandably, many people were suspect of my story, and I get that, but I assure you I've not made anything up, nor have I exaggerated details. I got some slack in the original post for not filing a police report. I realize now that even though nobody else was willing to, I should have stepped up and done it myself. At the time, my perspective was that because I don't know this guy on a personal level outside of work, it really should be up to someone closer to him to do that. But rest assured, a report was filed. Some people did try to take things seriously and even pointed out the strangely timed layoff. I know this might be far-fetched, but could your former company and boss somehow be involved? The guy disappears from work, your boss tells you shouldn't worry about it, take his belongings and refuses to access them to help find the guy. Then your boss says he filed a report, but apparently he never did, if the name doesn't come up in the databases. And finally, knowing you are investigating and possibly asking too many questions or drawing too much attention on the case, he fires you and never contacts you again about this case. However, due to the inconsistencies in SoothBB's story, the overwhelming majority of users were convinced this was just an attempt at an ARG. I still think it's an ARG. I hope it's an ARG. No offense, OP. But we will likely never know for sure. Unfortunately, shortly after posting this update, SoothBB deleted their Reddit account, leaving us with no way to uncover the truth. On the morning of January 2nd, 1978, a woman in California received a call asking for someone named Ray. She didn't know anyone by that name, so she simply told the caller they had the wrong number and hung up. Back then, callers had to manually enter each digit of the number they wanted to call in a rotary phone, and accidentally entering the wrong number was a common mistake. So she didn't think much of this and moved on with her day. However, things took a horrifying turn that evening when she received another call from the same person. And what she heard on the other end of this audio call was extremely disturbing.
Hello? Hello?
The man who was politely asking to speak with someone named Ray earlier was now threatening to end her life. What's worse is that this audio call wasn't a baseless threat or a troll. The person calling was later found out to be the Golden State Killer, one of the most infamous serial killers in US history. He terrorized California for over a decade from 1974 to 1986 and operated across multiple counties, including Sacramento, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Orange County. What made him more terrifying than most other serial killers was just how precise and thorough he was. Instead of committing the crime whenever he got the chance, he would often plan months in advance. He would stalk his victims, learning everything about their daily lives and routines to find the right opportunity. This also included surveying the area around their home to plan escape routes. Sometimes he would break into his victims' homes beforehand to unlock windows, unload guns, and plant the gear he was later going to use for the crime. He would also call his future victims many times leading up to the crime and threaten them, similar to the call you heard earlier. This was all a part of his act, with these calls serving as a way for him to mentally torment his victims ahead of time. When he eventually broke into their home for the last time, he would often tie them up and make himself at home, even cooking in their kitchen on occasion. Put simply, he was extremely confident in his planning, and unfortunately it worked. By the end of 1986, he had broken into different homes over 120 times, and in more than 64 victims, 3 of which were children. However, despite the authorities having tons of evidence against him, like fingerprints, footprints, masks, multiple rings, and many different sketches from witnesses, nothing led to a name. He would even call and taunt the police and families of his victims, daring them to catch him. But despite all this, the case remained cold for over 40 years. That is, until the late 2010s, when a new kind of detective work changed everything. You see, investigators already had plenty of DNA evidence from the killer. However, his DNA didn't match the limited samples they had in their database. But in 2016, a very distant relative of the Golden State Killer took a DNA ancestry test through one of the companies like 23andMe. The DNA data from this company was aggregated by a company called GED Match. And the FBI then used this extensive database to see if any of the samples matched with the DNA evidence they had. While they didn't find the killer, they did find a match with one of his very distant relatives. This allowed them to go through the whole family tree with over 1,000 members and eventually find the person they were looking for. After 40 long years, the identity of the man behind this creepy call was finally made public. On April 24, 2018, authorities arrested then 73-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. He was a Vietnam War veteran and an ex-police officer from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. Investigation of his past also revealed a chilling instance from July 1979 when he was arrested for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. In hindsight, it's obvious that he was going to use both of these items for one of his crimes. And the reason he tried to steal them instead of paying was because he didn't want the sale tied back to his name in any way. In July of 2020, Joseph pled guilty to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping in a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He was given 13 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and is now serving his time at a California state prison. The recorded audio calls he made to his soon-to-be victims have gone down as some of the most disturbing pieces of audio ever recorded. On the 1st of December 2017, Reddit user Drudagon17 made a Reddit post hoping to find an explanation for the terrifying screams he heard while on vacation. What's causing these screams? So, I'm not really sure what this is. I've had a lot of people tell me different things, but no one really knows for sure. Maybe someone here could help me shed some light. Alongside this, he linked to a recording of what sounded like a person screaming at the top of their lungs. The OP then went into detail describing the circumstances surrounding these disturbing noises, reading, "Earlier in the year, I went on a long road trip across the states, mainly visiting the national parks and a few cities along the way. Towards the end of the trip, we found ourselves staying in the small town of West Yellowstone. This appeared to be an ideal base whilst we explored Yellowstone National Park. We booked into a pretty creepy but cheap motel just off the main street for a couple of nights. Me and my fiancé had one room, my parents another. On the first morning there, we planned to get up early, catch the sunrise, and hopefully spot some of the local wildlife. So our alarms were set for 5 a.m. At about 4:45 a.m., I was woken by loud banging on the door, followed by crying and shouting. I instantly jumped out of my bed thinking the worst had happened. I opened the door to my mom in a state of panic, saying, "There's someone screaming, a woman screaming." There, clear as day, I could hear a woman screaming. It sounded as though it was within 100 feet of us. Mom claimed it had been happening for the last 30 minutes. We wanted to call the police but had no phone signal, no phones in the rooms, and we were the only people about. This on its own is pretty terrifying. But what made this encounter even more unnerving was what happened next, with the OP and his family having a very bizarre interaction with local law enforcement, stating, "Then, after I'd been hearing the scream for about half an hour, so roughly an hour since it started, a police officer seemed to appear out of nowhere. He started to ask questions about what we were doing and why we were up. We thought he'd come about the scream, so we quickly told him everything. He then heard the scream and sped off towards town. The screaming got less frequent and eventually stopped, so we decided to go about our day. We saw all the lovely sights of Yellowstone and even showed several park rangers the video to see if it's an animal. They all said they've not heard anything like it before. So when we got back into town that evening, we stopped into the sheriff's office to try and get some information. This was met with a lot of hostility from both the lady at reception, who eventually closed the shutter in our face, and the same officer we had seen that morning. They both said exactly the same thing. It almost sounded like a script. "Sorry ma'am, but that was an intoxicated woman yelling for her boyfriend." I don't quite understand how they can put that down to someone shouting at their boyfriend. I get people get really wasted, but not to the point where you just scream and never say any words. So, what was the source of the disturbing screaming Dredagon heard that night? The most prevalent theory I've come across is that these noises were coming from an animal, more specifically a mountain lion. This makes a lot of sense since mountain lions are native to the Yellowstone wilderness. More importantly, their screams are eerily similar to what the OP heard during his stay in that area. That said, it's still possible that the police officers were telling the truth and that these screams were coming from an intoxicated woman. The pitch of the second scream in the OP's recording in particular is a lot more human-like than something coming from an animal. One person on YouTube even tried to explain this uncanny difference, stating that the first round of screaming sounds like it's coming from a mountain lion, and the second time sounds like a person screaming back at the animal. Maybe they were just annoyed and were trying to scare away the animal or get it to shut up. While this could have been the case, most of the screaming noises OP heard were likely coming from a mountain lion, since according to his post, he didn't hear any cries for help or other words in these noises. Even if it were coming from a highly intoxicated woman, it's safe to assume that she would say something aside from just yelling at the top of her lungs. But if that's true, why did two different police officers tell the same lie? Some people speculated that they did so just to avoid scaring off tourists, or that they were just pulling a prank. But from what I've seen, Dredagon was most likely lying about this part of his story. It's entirely possible that after learning about the surprisingly normal origin of these creepy noises, the OP used this encounter to craft a disturbing story they could post on Reddit. Especially since at one point during his original post, he mentions showing the recording to multiple park rangers. Now, even if these rangers weren't 100% positive, they would still make the obvious connection with the similar animal noise that's common in that region. Dredagon also mentioned looking it up on YouTube and not finding any videos that could explain the disturbing screams. Even though, when searching "screaming in Yellowstone" on YouTube, one of the first results is a 9-year-old video showcasing a mountain lion scream. That being said, it's been over 7 years since the original post, and Dredagon hasn't posted any updates since. So, whether this was a mountain lion or something else more disturbing, we'll likely never know the truth with 100% certainty. In February 2016, the residents of Forest Grove, Oregon began hearing a strange, high-pitched noise in the area. This eerie noise was limited to the city of Forest Grove and the wilderness surrounding it. It could only be heard for a few minutes at a time. It would begin blaring randomly throughout the day and often late into the night before going away for a few hours. One of the most disturbing aspects of this noise was how quickly it spread to the entire city. Its tone was deeply uncomfortable, resulting in a lot of people calling the police in distress.
It's happened twice tonight. It's happened about 5 times during the last 7 days, and the neighbor beside me, we can't even hear each other in the backyard. Neither one of us can figure out what's happening.
Throughout that February, emergency services received over 200 calls from concerned citizens, some even reporting physical symptoms from hearing the noise. But one question was on everyone's mind: where was this screeching noise coming from? One of the first theories that came up was that the noise was coming from a gas leak, something that could possibly be that loud. However, the Northwest Natural Gas Company quickly shut down this idea, stating that if there was a gas leak, they would have become aware of it already. Also, a gas leak sounds more like a jet taking off rather than the screeching sound reported. On top of that, they pointed out that if there was a gas leak big enough to cause this much noise, the smell of the leaking gas would spread throughout the city as well. Another theory that came up was that this was the result of trapped air and sewer lines escaping through a manhole. However, a major flaw in this theory was that if it were true, why did the noise only begin in February of 2016? The fire marshal, on the other hand, suggested the idea that it might be coming from someone's faulty air conditioning system. This is because many dysfunctional systems emit a very high-frequency sound, similar to what the residents of Forest Grove were hearing. The truth is, this noise could have been coming from any number of sources, including construction equipment or a broken emergency siren. Unfortunately, the sound appeared to be coming from all directions, making it pretty much impossible to find its origin and verify any of these theories. While everyone was desperately trying to figure things out, the daily noise was becoming more and more unsettling with each passing day. But the eerie noise then suddenly disappeared just as quickly as it had begun. Over 9 years later, and this strange noise is still an unsolved mystery. That said, I believe the most likely theory is also the most boring one, that this whole thing was a prank or hoax by someone with a horn of some kind. You see, after getting overwhelmed by the number of calls from Forest Grove residents, the local police station began investigating the phenomenon more seriously. Amid their search, they put out a statement warning any potential pranksters, reading, "While some might find it comical, interesting, and mysterious, it's unlawful if it's being done on purpose. If this is the case, the individual caught will face possible repercussions." A couple days after this statement came out, the noise vanished and hasn't returned since. It's almost as if whoever was behind this realized that the prank was not worth the trouble and stopped. Of course, all this is just a theory on its own. But unless someone comes forward with a confession, I doubt we'll ever learn the truth about the origin of this disturbing noise. On March 2nd, 2013, an anonymous user made an entry on 4chan talking about a creepy radio hijacking they experienced as a kid. The post read, "A creepy, I think, audio file which I've always been curious about. Back in 1994/1995, when I recorded this off of the radio, I told myself I'd never make a copy of the tape, having freaked myself out. But it's been sitting in the back of a desk drawer and in the back of my mind for 16 years now, and now I'm just curious. The weird stuff starts about 16 seconds in. Around 1995, I was about 15. I used to stay up late in my room listening to the radio on a boombox with an integrated tape recorder. I'd dial through the stations, and when I heard something interesting, I'd hit record for a while and then move on. One night, I came across this. I don't think this was the beginning of the broadcast, but I caught a lot of it. Right at the end, an announcer says that the station I was tuned to was WKCR 89.9 New York. There are a bunch of names and dates in there, but I've never run into anything else like this." Alongside this was a link to an audio file that starts off quite normal with a section from a 1993 song by Billy Cobham. It then abruptly transitions into a violin section from a song called Golden Sonata by Henry Purcell. The audio then morphs into a bone-chilling, high-pitched scream of sorts. This alone is extremely creepy, but the audio doesn't stop there. Soon after this high-pitched scream, it morphs into the sound of a woman taking deep breaths. This breathing pattern repeats a few times, ultimately leading into the sound of a woman reading seemingly random names and dates in an almost whisper. This voice keeps repeating the same 9 names and dates over and over again. A little investigation shows that the names and dates are taken from their obituaries. The 2 most notable names among these belong to Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of the creator of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, and Barry Joseph Valentino Jr., one of the victims of the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing in 1988. However, from what I've seen, there's no correlation between any of the names besides the fact that they're all dead. After repeating these names for a few minutes, the broadcast goes back to normal with a seemingly routine call sign announcement.
You're tuned to WKCR-FM New York, 89.9 on your dial. Colombian music is running a little late. It will be starting in a few minutes.
Now, when the anonymous user originally posted this on 4chan, it received mixed reactions. Some people were deeply creeped out by it, while others were skeptical and believed the OP made this whole thing up. So, what's the truth? Well, there's evidence supporting both sides of the argument. The thing is, after receiving a few requests, the OP posted the full audio clip on YouTube with a channel named Ravenmouth. Searching it on Google shows that the OP has a Reddit account by the same name. With this, we can see that a couple of weeks after his 4chan post, Ravenmouth posted the same radio hijacking story on the No Sleep subreddit, which is mainly about believable but not always true disturbing stories. Near the end of this post, Ravenmouth also added a new section that wasn't present in his 4chan post, reading, "Unfortunately, and for this I sincerely apologize, it never ever stops. I told you this was just something I'd found, and I swear to you that that's true. It really did happen that way. It's more than that though. I don't really know how long it takes. A few weeks or months from now when you're alone and suddenly you hear the keening, quavering sound rise up like it's crawling out of your spine and into your skull, you'll understand. When that night comes, if you listen closely to what comes after the horrible sound, you'll realize that the woman will be reading your name, new names. You'll play it for your friends, your family, add their names. I hope, desperately, that if I can make the list long enough, add enough names, then they'll take mine off and leave me alone. I'm sorry." This is plenty of evidence to show that this story is fictional and Ravenmouth made it all up. However, he remains adamant that while he did embellish the story a bit for the Reddit post, he still did record the audio from the radio when he was a teenager. So, could the WKCR station have actually been hijacked by someone? It's entirely possible. Radio hijackings are not a new phenomenon and were certainly a thing back when this would have happened. But WKCR is owned by a college and ran almost entirely by college students. When asked about it, the WKCR team stated, "As far as we know, this did take place on WKCR airwaves. In terms of the claim that it was a hijacking, that is very unlikely. WKCR is a weird place with weird programmers, probably just some late-night new music programmer having fun on the mic." Put simply, Ravenmouth was likely telling the truth, but what he thought was a creepy hijacking was just the artsy experiment of a college student. Although this, of course, cannot be 100% confirmed. On March 1st, 1999, the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded an ominous sound coming from the ocean. This is what it sounds like at 16 times speed. This sound, named Julia, lasted for a whole 2 minutes and 43 seconds and was powerful enough to be detected across the entire equatorial Pacific Ocean hydrophone network. Hydrophones, for those who don't know, are basically underwater microphones. They were originally installed to detect submarines during the Cold War and were later converted to be used for general ocean research. This network became popular in 1997 when it captured multiple strange sounds coming from within the ocean, including the now iconic bloop. According to the official explanation, the sound heard in this recording was caused by ice quakes and large icebergs, or by icebergs scraping the ocean floor. Julia was recorded nearly 2 years after this one. However, unlike bloop, it doesn't have an explanation. Due to the high loudness of Julia, scientists weren't able to pinpoint its exact location. One potential solution that's been floating on the internet for a while now is that Julia originated from underwater volcanic activity. Sadly, this theory falls apart quickly upon inspection. This is mainly because there was also recorded audio coming from an underwater volcano called Upsweep, and it sounds nothing like Julia. A somewhat more interesting theory that tries to explain Julia is that the sound originates from an unknown sea creature. And while this does sound like science fiction at best, it feels a lot more feasible when you consider the fact that we're yet to explore over 80% of the ocean in detail. However, the very idea of an ocean creature big enough to produce a sound audible from thousands of kilometers away is terrifying, and honestly quite out there. The sound dubbed Julia is one of many underwater sounds recorded that have yet to be identified. The 2006 volleyball incident. On July 2nd, 2017, an anonymous user posted a thread on 4chan's paranormal board saying, "How does one live after taking the red pill on the 2006 volleyball incident?" Now, if you're wondering what that incident was, it's a strange and disturbing story. The post was referring to a supposed mass shooting where a gunman killed 14 people during a high school volleyball game in either South Dakota or Nebraska back in 2006. But here's where things get strange. If you search for any information about it online, you'll find nothing. No news articles, no official casualty reports, nothing. Just conspiracy theory websites and the occasional Reddit post asking if it even happened. It's like the whole event either never existed or was somehow erased from history. But despite the silence online, there are many people who claim they remember hearing about it. Some even say they were at Mount Rushmore around that time and heard a report about it on the radio. For a long time, the only evidence of the incident on the internet was this still frame from a home video that was supposedly taken just before the incident with the date September 27, 2006 embedded on it. That is, until some ordinary gamer, a YouTuber who often dives into dark web rabbit holes, discovered more evidence. While browsing the Late Nights forum on a 4chan-like site, he came across the gruesome pictures of a bloody school gym that were allegedly taken soon after the shooting had already happened.
So right here, let's go down a little bit over here. They've got 2006 volley. Oh my god. Oh, we're gonna have to blur this one. Jesus Christ, that's actually like death footage. I think I remember this. I was searching around for some sort of proof of this happening, and apparently it's a snippet from a home video. Oh my god. We have to blur that out. I gotta make sure we note that, blur it real quick. Let me add that to the notes here. Jesus, it's like an actual straight up bloody massacre. It's like VHS recorded. This has to be from like a movie. There's no way. This has to be from like some movie. It's crazy as hell. That it's got like a CBI not for release. Like I assume CBI stands for like some sort of a governmental organization or something. That is so messed up. I feel like I should have known this or something. I don't even know if that's like a conspiracy. How is that a conspiracy? It's actually like death put, unless it's from like some movie or something that we don't know about. Jesus Christ. That is actually the most chilling thing I've seen. We're like 5 minutes into this recording and already it's just like death footage has hit the building.
In the bottom right corner was the text CBI not for release, which I'll do my best to show you while blurring everything else out. This has led to some pretty wild theories being spread all over the internet. According to the most popular ones, the incident did happen, but it was covered up by the American government. As the story goes, the government was trying to assassinate someone who was attending this high school volleyball game. Things got out of hand, however, and a lot of the young volleyball players were caught in the crossfire. And since this would have caused tons of backlash from the public, the government instructed the news media to not talk about the story and also paid the victims' families to keep them quiet. However, while the US government is no stranger to covering up the truth, I have to admit this one is quite far-fetched. Keeping something this big under wraps for so long feels pretty out there. At some point, you'd think the truth would slip out. A somewhat more reasonable theory is that this is a classic case of the Mandela effect, where large groups of people collectively misremember something. And coincidentally enough, I actually did find a similar incident that happened in 2006 in that region. In the Platte Canyon High School situation, 53-year-old Dwayne Roger Morrison took 7 female students hostage, attacked them, and ended up shooting one of them. This also took place on September 27, 2006, which is the same date on which the alleged photo was taken before the incident. Its location in Colorado might also explain why people from the Midwest remember hearing about it on the news. But there are some major differences. Most notably, the Platte Canyon incident had nothing to do with a volleyball game, and there was only one death. But in saying all of that, the most likely scenario is that all of this is a hoax. While researching this incident, I came across an interesting post on the forum Above Top Secret from 2017. In this post, the OP was talking about creating a hoax in which multiple school shootings happened in 2006 in tiny towns, but any information relating to these incidents has been mysteriously erased from the public record. But if that's the case, the images that some ordinary gamer came across, where did they come from? Considering it's been over 7 years since this first contraction on the internet, it's unlikely we'll ever know the answer to this disturbing internet rabbit hole. Grave robbing for morons. On August 8, 2014, a user by the name Simon Pred J posted a video on YouTube titled Grave Robbing for Morons. This was a digital re-upload of a very old VHS video, an extremely chilling one at that. In it, a young man goes into disturbing detail explaining step by step how to rob graves and sell the remains on the black market.
Grab it by the eyes or the nose. You pull it out, put your finger all the way in. There's nothing there that will hurt you at all. Or you have to make sure of that. There's nothing that can hurt you. Do not be afraid. Pull it out like that. Do not pull it by the teeth, or else it'll break out like that, and you will have holes.
What makes this video even more unsettling isn't just its content, but the mystery surrounding it. No one knows who the man in the video is. To this day, his identity remains unknown, and no one has come forward to claim responsibility. This has left the internet in 2 fiercely opposing camps. Some believe this is authentic footage of a real grave robber. Others argue it's an obscure horror short crafted purely for shock value. Surprisingly, I came across evidence that supports both sides of the argument while researching this topic. One undeniable fact, however, is that the original video is extremely old. The earliest mention of its title, Grave Robbing for Morons, I found on the internet was a now defunct online store for horror VHS tapes called Shocking Videos. This website listed the tape for sale in April of 2003, stating, "What we have here is genuine camcorder footage of a drunken teenage stutterer giving a half-hour lecture on how to steal body parts from graveyards for fun and profit while holding a fresh, rotting skull in his hands." That said, the original video is likely from the late 80s. We can clearly see the VHS box for the 1987 Evil Dead 2 movie 5 minutes and 43 seconds into the video. And to narrow it down even more, there's an issue of Horror FX magazine visible in the bottom left corner at the same time. This specific cover was a part of a unique Fangoria horror magazine edition released in July 1989, which means the video was probably shot around that year. The horror memorabilia scattered throughout the footage implies that whoever created this video might have been a die-hard horror fan just trying to make something creepy for the thrill of it. And while most of the gruesome advice given in the video feels very authentic, like describing ways to remove the skull from a body that hasn't fully decomposed yet, there are also sections that seem extremely goofy. Like when the host suggests knocking out witnesses so they think it was all just a dream.
Never leave witnesses. If you have to knock them out so that way they think it's a dream.
This gives further credence to the theory that the subject doesn't have any real grave robbing experience and is just making it all up for the video. On the other hand, some people argue that the skull he's showing in the video is far too detailed to be fake. As for the inconsistency in the advice, that could be explained by the theory that this was likely his first time robbing a grave, and that he was simply making things up to seem more knowledgeable on the topic than he actually was. But this is where things start getting really eerie. Toward the end of the tape, the guy almost mumbles his full name, but stops himself before saying his entire last name.
Okay, this was made by Anthony. Well, as a matter of fact, let's forget the last name.
And in 1999, a man named Anthony Casamassima was arrested in New York for stealing an expensive stained glass window from a cemetery. There was a real possibility that this was the same person who made the Grave Robbing for Morons guide. That being said, there are a few inconsistencies that say otherwise. For instance, I did not find any charges against Anthony Casamassima that mentioned him desecrating bodies. He was more into stealing valuable artifacts like stained glass. And more importantly, Casamassima was 40 when he was arrested in 1999. If he made the tape, he would have been around 30 at the time. However, given the young appearance of the video's subject, that seems highly unlikely. I also found a couple more theories as well, but most of them lead to dead ends. One such theory claims the guy in the video might be Craig A. Bradley, who was arrested in 1995 for stealing human remains from a cemetery in upstate New York. Craig would have been around 24 when the grave robbing video was filmed, which fits with the young appearance of the guy in the tape, plus he even looks a bit like him. However, the issue with this theory is that Craig doesn't have the stutter that was prominent in the original video.
Usually, winter months I'm laid off. So winter months, I don't usually pay.
Dig for you and everything, so you dig and your friend digs, and then it's another friend digs. You have to find some place really secluded, so that way there's no interruptions, okay?
Now, he could have faked the stutter in the original video for some reason. However, people on the internet find that extremely unlikely given how real it feels. Grave robber or actor, the stutter is real. I've known several people with really bad stutters, and it's such a specific, uncontrollable behavior that makes it hard to fake. This kid's stutter feels unique and authentic. I've never seen an actor in a movie fake a stutter that felt this real. It's possible one day the person seen in the video will come forward with the truth, but for now we have no idea who the person is or whether or not this extremely realistic looking grave robbing video is real. Strange sounds in the sky. Over the past 50 plus years, there have been numerous reports of people hearing mysterious sounds coming from the sky. In some cases, the mysterious noise resembles the sound of screeching metal, like someone dragging heavy metal furniture across the floor. However, the most commonly reported noise is a low-frequency hum that persists in the area. Those who can hear these sounds describe them as omnipresent and extremely annoying. And according to the BBC, the humming noise has been linked to at least one person ending their own life in the UK. However, while there are likely many legit reports of people hearing a mysterious humming, which we'll get to in a bit, many of the claims are either fake or can be explained quite easily. For instance, the metallic screeching noise could simply be from a nearby railroad with a long freight train rounding a corner and causing vibrations. Some of these trains are incredibly lengthy and can take several minutes to pass. Similarly, in another video you can hear what sounds like an extremely loud trumpet. The original poster of this video titled this as a judgment trumpet, referring to the divine trumpet described in the Christian faith. However, given the poor weather conditions in the footage, it's likely just a malfunctioning tornado siren, like this. A few of these videos are also outright faked, with the mysterious sounds being edited in to generate views. Notice how the birds around the area appear completely unaffected by the loud, ominous noise, which would be unlikely if the sound was genuinely overwhelming the environment. Birds have sharper hearing than humans, and they would likely react. That said, there are still thousands of reports from people who can't be easily debunked or labeled as fake. Unlike the examples I've shown so far, the vast majority of seemingly authentic reports involve the persistent, low-frequency hum. This strange phenomenon seems to trace back to Bristol, England in the late 1970s. The city council received hundreds of complaints from residents about a strange noise that was audible at night. One local newspaper even asked readers in the city, "Have you heard the hum?" and almost 800 people said they had. French scientists back then proposed that the sound might originate from the ocean, suggesting that continuous waves could be vibrating the ocean floor. Now, this explanation might have been true for Bristol, but as time went on, more and more people around the world started reporting these disturbing humming noises. And it appears the Bristol hum is still present to this day. There are many theories that attempt to explain the bizarre global phenomenon. And these can get into some truly out there conspiracies, like aliens or secret underground civilizations in the hollow earth. However, the most plausible explanation I found suggests that these sounds are more connected to the listeners themselves rather than their surroundings. Things like hypersensitive ears and early signs of hearing issues like tinnitus could be a major contributor. Another possible reason could be the increasing levels of anxiety and stress. A BBC researcher also noted that she only heard the hum when she was exhausted and stressed out, which further supports the notion of this mysterious hum being a psychosomatic or stress-related phenomenon. During my research, I even found a video claiming to capture the strange humming sound. But when I watched it, there was nothing unusual, just regular environmental noise. It's entirely possible that the person who recorded it was hearing something from inside their body, misinterpreting it as an external sound, which further supports the stress-related theory. However, this doesn't explain the hundreds or even thousands of other videos that do include the hum. And given the endless amounts of possibilities for each individual case, I doubt we'll get a concrete answer anytime soon. John Lang Fresno Police. On March 20th, 2015, a YouTube channel by the name Lang Marine uploaded a 3.5-minute video titled Fresno LE Harassment, Ford Crew Cab that stalked me and my residence numerous times. The video showed the same vehicle driving past the camera twice in 3 minutes. The uploader was a 51-year-old former Marine named John Lang living in Fresno, California. The video footage came from a security camera he had installed outside his home. And in the description of this video, he provided much-needed context behind the oddly disturbing encounter. According to Lang, he was critical of the way Fresno PD and Fresno Fire utilized their budgets online. So now they were stalking and harassing him in retaliation, and the Ford truck in the video belonged to either the Fresno Police Department or the Sheriff's Office. The next day, he posted another video of a man walking his dog outside his home. The video showed the dog and his owner stopping outside Lang's home for a few seconds and moving on, nothing too unusual. However, Lang claimed that the person in the video was a plainclothes police officer who was conditioning Lang's dog so that it wouldn't attack if the same officer broke into his home later. Over the next 10 or so months, Lang continued posting videos of shady activity captured by his security camera, like a guy in plain clothes coming up to his home, taking a look and walking away immediately. Or a police truck stopping outside his home for a few seconds and then driving away. However, the most disturbing of these videos showed a mysterious black van stopping outside his home, filming it with a massive camera for about 30 seconds and quickly driving away. Lang claimed that the device in their hand was a thermal imaging sensor and they were trying to determine whether or not he was home. By January of 2016, Lang was fully convinced that the Fresno police were planning an assassination. On the 16th of January, he posted a video about a cleaning company van parked outside his home. In the description of the video, he wrote, "If I turn up missing or dead tomorrow, remember this van. I think I seen a couple of guys sneak out the side door and into the building when it was parked in the carport this afternoon. I've been causing the city of Fresno a lot of problems recently, which I now regret." Unfortunately, this would be the last video Lang would post on YouTube, because just a few days later, firemen found him dead inside a burning home with multiple stab wounds on his body. This was sad news for people who were following the story. However, this was only the beginning of a much bigger conspiracy. You see, when the news of his death initially broke, the reports stated that he had a few stab wounds on his upper back as well. If this were true, it would validate all of Lang's worries about getting assassinated. This would also put the Fresno PD as the #1 suspect for his murder. However, when the Fresno coroner released Lang's autopsy report, it only mentioned 3 self-inflicted stab wounds on his chest, and there was no mention of any stab wounds on his back. Was the earlier report a mistake, or were the Fresno police trying to hide their crime? This inconsistency led to tons of backlash and even a petition to reopen his case, but it remained closed. To this day, the John Lang case sits as a mystery. Was he actually getting stalked, or was he just severely mentally ill and paranoid? From my research, the answer seems to be a mix of both. First and foremost, it's worth mentioning that the Fresno police are well known for being ripe with corruption. A Reddit user mentioned a story he knew about the PD, stating, "I mean, my friend's dad was FPD for decades, and Jerry Dyer showed up with some officers and threatened him back in the late 90s, so it wouldn't surprise me if the cops were intimidating this dude." So, did the Fresno PD retaliate against Lang? Maybe. What's more likely is that Lang was getting more paranoid and losing his mind over time. From what I can see, the man walking his dog is doing just that, walking his dog, and claiming that he was somehow conditioning Lang's dog in just a couple of seconds is pretty out there. Even the suspicious van can be explained quite easily since the device shown in the video was just a film camera on a gimbal, not some high-tech thermal imaging sensor. As for why they were shooting like that from a vehicle, they were likely indie filmmakers who just didn't have the proper permissions from the city. However, all of this is just conjecture on my part. The real evidence that proves Lang's deteriorating mental state is the fact that he turned off the cameras he had in his home a day before the incident. The last saved footage on these cameras was of him sitting with a kitchen knife in his hand. Not only that, but when the fire department arrived on the scene, all the entrances to his home were barricaded securely from the inside. If this was truly a murder, the killer wouldn't have been able to escape the crime scene without removing one of these barricades. Ultimately, if there was some big murder conspiracy behind Lang's death, I doubt we'll learn about it over 8 years later. Evil Stick. In November of 2014, Nicole Allen purchased a pink princess wand for a 2-year-old daughter at the dollar store in Linden Avenue in Kettering. The name of the wand was Evil Stick, which is quite bizarre on its own, but likely went unnoticed by Nicole. However, the stick also promised things like luster, beauty, and wonderful music. The box art also featured the character Sakura Kinomoto, who was the protagonist of a popular Japanese animated show called Cardcaptor Sakura. In the show, Sakura is essentially a magical princess, so the inclusion of just a cute-looking character made Nicole drop her guard even further. But she couldn't have been more wrong. The thing is, the inclusion of this character on the box art suggested an Asian origin for the product. And looking back, the Evil Stick does have a small, and I do mean small, resemblance to one of the wands Sakura uses in the show. The Evil Stick was most definitely a bootleg version of a product that should have looked something like this had it been official. However, the Evil Stick was much more sinister than just being a bad product. Unlike its official counterparts, the manufacturers of the Evil Stick bootleg had free reign to do whatever they wanted. And it's what they chose to do with this freedom that was utterly disturbing. You see, the top of the wand had a shiny foil fitted in, likely to imitate the shiny star in the official wand. However, this foil was hiding an image under it, and when Nicole's daughter accidentally removed the foil while playing with the wand, she was greeted with a downright disturbing image of a creepy-looking woman slitting her own wrist. This was likely petrifying for the little girl, but that wasn't all. If you pressed the button on the wand, instead of the wonderful music it promised, the wand played a haunting laugh. This also turned on a light behind the creepy image, so the little girl would have likely seen it even if she hadn't removed the foil. When Nicole found out about the disturbing truth, she made her findings public in hopes of getting this creepy toy banned from stores. News coverage of the Evil Stick quickly went viral, but the toy remained as mysterious as it was creepy. And the disturbing image concealed within the toy was traced back to French photographer Butcher Ludwig, who appears to be a master of creating the most nightmarish artworks one can imagine. Nearly all of his work is too graphic for YouTube. For most of them, however, even a quick glance is enough to trigger your fight or flight response. As for why the gory, horror-filled work of his photograph was stolen to be included in a children's toy, no one knows for sure. The only other thing people learned about the Evil Stick after examining its package was that it was manufactured in China, and that's it. The packaging didn't have the name of the manufacturer. I even looked up the universal product code embedded in its barcode and couldn't find any relevant information through that either. This is just one of those things that really makes you wonder what other disturbing mysteries are hidden inside cheap children's toys. On August 15, 1989, a family of 3 was driving along Interstate 205 near Stockton, California when their car began to overheat. Forced to pull over, the father popped the hood to check the damage. It didn't take long to realize they needed professional help. Leaving the mother behind to stay with the car, the father and his young son set out on foot to find a payphone. As they walked, the boy noticed something unusual, a camouflage jacket discarded by the side of the road. This piqued his curiosity and he went over to take a closer look, only to find an unmarked VHS tape sticking out from one of its pockets. The boy picked up the tape and later brought it back to his home. By this point, his parents were also curious about what they'd find on this seemingly abandoned tape. So they inserted it in their home VHS player and pressed play. However, the contents of the tape were far darker than what they could have imagined. Now, the original unedited video has never been made available online, but there are different pieces from various sources that I've done my best to put together. It opened with the camera pointed at a massive fire at night, with what I can only assume is the cameraman saying some ominous stuff.
Look at the fire. This is my domain. My hell.
A bit into the video, the camera refocused and the source of the fire became clear. It was a single-story home that looked like it was still under construction before it caught fire.
I call it home. My hell. The whole sky's black with smoke. A fire that I will destroy and burn your soul up. Ancient spirit of evil.
Meanwhile, the cameraman kept talking, and the longer he spoke, the more unsettling it became. Later in the video, you could also hear fire trucks arriving at the scene and the cameraman commenting on it before ending the video with a direct threat to the viewer.
Look at it. The fire department's trying to put it out. What a laugh. I gotta go now. But remember me. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Your house is next.
The tape then abruptly cut to the scene from the 1984 horror film A Nightmare on Elm Street. It wasn't clear if the fire video was taped on top of the movie or if this was a deliberate edit. However, one thing was clear: the frightening video was filmed by the person who set the house on fire. The family handed over the tape to the police and told them exactly where and how they found it. Detectives went back to the location, and sure enough, the family's story checked out. The jacket was still there. But the detectives also found many other items near the jacket, including a wooden pestle, a glove, a cassette of metal music, and a ceramic skull. They also watched the video itself, and it was unlike anything they had seen before.
I've never run across anything as eerie as this tape. Frightened me, as a matter of fact. I thought about it that night when I went to bed.
Unfortunately, the poor filming conditions and shaky nature of the footage prevented them from extracting any meaningful clues about the location of this fire. Despite a frame-by-frame analysis, investigators were unable to match the tape with any reported fires in the state of California. For all they knew, the fire could have happened anywhere in the US. As for the motive behind this action, the constant talk of hell and evil led the investigators to believe that it had something to do with Satanism. And while this might sound a bit far-fetched today, you have to remember that back in the 1980s, major acts of evil from devil worshippers was a real concern for many people. But without any leads, this was nothing more than a theory. So, after exhausting all other options, investigators decided to enlist the help of the media and featured the story on the popular TV show Unsolved Mysteries in September of 1990. And this worked better than the cops could have ever imagined. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, investigators received over 1,000 calls from viewers with potential leads. Among these 1,000 plus callers was a man named Ed Tarantino, who got shaken to his core after seeing the found footage on TV, because he lived next to the burning house in Redwood City, California, some 80 miles west to where the tape was originally found. More importantly, the show also led the investigators to the owner of the under-construction home that was burning in the video, Bill Otherlie, who described the incident as the act of a crazy person.
And turned up, it's my house that's on the videotape. And then you heard the voice of this individual. You go, this guy ain't playing with a full deck.
This was an extremely expensive loss for Bill. The fire had completely destroyed his under-construction home, costing him $900,000, which is about $2.5 million in today's money. Meanwhile, the Redwood City Fire Department also confirmed the incident. As it turns out, the fire department had captured their own footage of the incident for use in future training, and parts of this fire department footage matched the mysterious tape. Cross-referencing the two videos also revealed that the arsonist was just about 50 feet away from the fireman when he recorded his video.
The fire department's trying to put it out. What a laugh.
Now, all that remained was to capture the culprit. But that wasn't going to be easy. According to the owner of the fire department reports, the arson attack happened in August of 1988, which is an entire year before the tape was found on the side of the road. The only lead the investigators had on the suspect was the name he mentioned in the video, Omar.
Look at it, Omar. This is what I've been doing on your week's vacation. I said I'll do it. I said I'll do it.
It wasn't much, and for a while it seemed like a dead end. That is, until the police received a new tip from Doris Lance, another person who saw the Unsolved Mysteries episode on TV. She suspected that the Omar mentioned in the video was referring to a 17-year-old boy who lived in the area. And when the police brought him in for questioning, he cracked almost immediately and told them everything. Omar claimed that he was silently standing off camera when the video was filmed, and that it was his 19-year-old friend who started the fire and recorded the video. The investigators were finally getting close to the perpetrator, but they needed more evidence before making their move, so they started tailing the alleged arsonist, observing him from a distance. However, he likely caught wind of the police because soon after the monitoring started, his garage burned to the ground. At that point, the police had no choice but to act. On September 27, 1990, they confronted the 19-year-old directly. And just like Omar, he folded without much of a fight and confessed to everything. One thing I should point out is that the authorities never publicly revealed the identities of the two boys, so I'll call the arsonist John for the sake of convenience. After going through John's home, investigators also found tons of incriminating evidence that linked them to not only the Redwood City fire, but similar arson attacks on 11 other structures and 15 grass fires. This evidence included things like a picture of graffiti on a wall stating, "Please no more houses," and a news clipping pinned to the wall about recent arsons which the two boys likely caused. But that wasn't all. In the burned down garage, they discovered bloodied knives and mutilated animal parts. They also found tapes containing disturbing footage of John dressing up as a satanic vampire and threatening a humanoid sculpture with a knife.
How you doing, Father? I hope you're doing real good.
But not all of the footage was so theatrical. One of the most notable clips showed the two boys goofing around in an open field.
And now, to finish the job.
That field, as it turned out, was being transformed into a housing development. It's likely the boys were furious about the changes and decided to take matters into their own hands by torching under construction homes to stop the developments. This would also explain the eerie graffiti I mentioned earlier. However, since both of them were minors when they started those fires, they were tried as juveniles despite the severity of their crimes. Omar was sent to juvenile detention, while John was deemed mentally unwell and was admitted to a mental institute. What happened to the two after that, we don't know. I've seen some claims that John was released from the mental institute and died in a car accident in 2017. And while there's no direct evidence to back this claim, I did find a news report of a hit and run in Redwood City from January of 2017. The victim of this incident was 45 years old, which aligns perfectly with the age John would have been in 2017. But if this is completely unrelated and John is still alive, I seriously doubt he'd reveal himself now just to satisfy the curiosity of randoms on the internet. As for the tape itself, it's still unclear how it found its way on the side of the interstate. On August 23, 1987, a pair of backpackers were hiking south of the Junco Lake trailhead in the mountains near the tiny town of Tabernash, Colorado. However, what might have seemed like an ordinary hike quickly turned into an unforgettable experience that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The two came across the wreckage of a crashed plane with parts scattered everywhere. They informed the authorities about the find, prompting a complete search of the area for evidence of what happened to this plane and when. While Dale Wood, a Colorado deputy sheriff, was investigating the area, his attention was drawn to a VHS tape hanging from a tree. Most of the tape's insides had come out and were tangled in the branches, but he recovered everything he could and brought it back for restoration to a somewhat playable condition, and the footage was disturbing to say the least. The VHS contained the last moments of two men who went missing 3 years ago, the 36-year-old James Jeb Cottle and his similarly aged passenger Ronald Hugh Wilmond. On August 10, 1984, the two flew from the Granby airport with the Jeffco Airport as their destination on a small Cessna L-19E Bird Dog airplane. However, they never arrived at this destination. Multiple search parties were deployed to their approximate route, but none were able to find any evidence of what happened to James and Ronald. What made their disappearance even more mysterious was the fact that the plane had an emergency locator transmitter, a device that would have broadcast its location in the case of a crash. However, the authorities never received the signal from this device, and their case remained cold for almost 3 years. That is until the pair of backpackers found the wreckage, which in turn led to the discovery of the VHS tape. The footage starts off quite normal, with the pilot commenting on things he sees from the cockpit.
Oh, look at that down there, Ronnie, on the left. Nice little lake and a cabin. Those dead trees down there. A whole bunch of them back up in here, those beetles. Very pretty little lake.
However, around 5 minutes into the footage, things start to go wrong as the ground starts coming closer and closer. Experts analyzed this footage to find out what went wrong, and apparently the pilot failed to account for density altitude before taking off. For those that aren't familiar with aviation lingo, think of density altitude as the thickness of the air. When it's hot, humid, or a higher altitude, the air becomes thinner, making it harder for planes to fly well. Pilots use density altitude to know how their plane will perform, like how much runway they need or how much weight they can carry. On the day of the crash, the density altitude around Tabernash was 13,000 feet. In other words, the air was as thin as it would be at an altitude of 13,000 feet. James failed to account for this massive difference. When his plane came across rapidly rising mountains around 10,200 feet above sea level, he wasn't able to lift the plane in time to fly over them safely. The footage showed how he tried to quickly turn back, but stalled the plane's engine in the process, resulting in it turning over and crashing into the trees. The footage also explained why the emergency locator transmitter didn't work. The plane flipped upside down just before the crash, which damaged the transmitter, preventing it from signaling for help. It was an unfortunate incident all around. The only potentially good thing that came out of this is that James Cottle's family authorized this found footage to be used in flight instructor training. So maybe somebody's life was spared because they saw this footage and remembered to adjust for density altitude before taking off. On the 31st of May 2013, the loud noise of a tornado siren was echoing through the streets of El Reno, Oklahoma. Meteorologists were predicting a potential multiple vortex tornado that might touch down in the area. And while this was bad news for the residents of El Reno, the rarity of such an event also attracted a lot of storm chasers from around the United States. This also included a 3-man crew of storm chasing experts, the 55-year-old Tim Samaras, his 24-year-old son Paul Samaras, and their partner 45-year-old Carl Young. The three had extensive experience in safely chasing twisters and gathering valuable data from them. They were also a part of the Discovery Channel's Storm Chasers and were heavily involved in the show from seasons 3 to 5. In May of 2013, the trio had actually arrived in the stormy area many days earlier to thoroughly analyze the storm before giving chase.
Oh, I'd say this is the one. Oh yeah. This is going to be the storm of the day right here. This is going to do it, I think.
Unfortunately, the May 31st twister wasn't something they could have predicted, even with their vast knowledge and experience. It started around 6 p.m. when an EF3 tornado touched down in El Reno, marking the beginning of the chase. However, it wasn't long before the tornado started becoming more volatile.
See, the rain is behind us. Oh my God.
What was supposed to be a category EF3 quickly turned into an EF5, which is the most intense a tornado can get. But even the title of EF5 cannot fully demonstrate the terrifying scale of this particular twister. By the time it stopped growing, the El Reno tornado had a radius of 2.6 miles, the largest in recorded history. It also had a wind speed of 313 miles per hour or over 500 kilometers per hour. Carl and the Samaras brothers were attempting to ride parallel to the tornado to observe from a safe distance. Unfortunately, the twister made an unexpected turn and started coming towards their car. They tried everything in their power to escape safely, but sadly, it was too late. The tornado flung the car into the air, sending it barreling across the El Reno region. After the storm had passed, search parties found their car, which was reduced to 60% of its original size. And while Tim's body was found strapped inside the vehicle, Paul and Carl's bodies were found half a mile east and west of the car. All three had tragically passed away in the incident. After some more searching, authorities also found a camera which was miraculously still recording. And after reviewing the footage, it became clear that it had recorded Tim, Paul, and Carl's final moments. Now, as far as I could tell, the raw footage from this camera has not been released to the public, and no one has leaked it anywhere on the internet. But a select few people have seen the footage, including the crew's close friend Gabe Garfield. According to him, he could hear Carl talking about how eerily calm the air around them had become in the moments before their end. To which Tim replied, "Actually, we're in a bad spot," before uttering his final words, "We're going to die." To this day, the story of Tim, Paul, and Carl serves as a stark warning to aspiring storm chasers, highlighting the immense danger of their pursuit. Even a team of industry-leading veterans couldn't withstand the unpredictable fury of a twister. On the 1st of June 2024, a YouTube channel by the name of Found Memories uploaded a video titled Tape 92, Found Footage, Jason Sleeping. The video is timestamped for 9:27 p.m. on April 22, 2007, and opens with the cameraman placing the camera in a way that faces a sleeping child. Aside from the sleeping child turning a few times, nothing happens for the rest of this nearly 30-minute video. There's not even any unusual sound in the background or anything. Now, despite the footage being completely uneventful, something about this whole thing is inherently unsettling. The lack of context and the uncomfortable silence can easily turn this into nightmare fuel if you have an active enough imagination. According to the description of the video, the original tape was simply labeled as Jason Sleeping. The uploader also gave an explanation for where they found the footage, stating, "Found in a box full of abandoned camcorder videos, uploading to archive the footage. Perhaps one day someone connected to the video will see it and appreciate it." And while this provides some much needed context, it still leaves the biggest question unanswered. Why would anyone record 30 minutes of a child sleeping? So I decided to dig a bit further. The first thing that came to mind is that this is just another one of those staged, artsy, analog horror type videos. However, after going through the channel that posted this video, I don't think that's the case. The channel, Found Memories, was created fairly recently in April of 2024. The About section of the channel reads, "Uploading media I've found to archive, and maybe one day the original owners will find it and appreciate it. I've acquired thousands of videotapes and media over the years from various places, pawn shops, private sellers, auctions, and thrift stores to name a few. I recently had the idea to start this channel as a way to start archiving them and actually do something with them. Maybe one day someone connected to them will find them." And this seems to be the truth. At the time of writing, this channel has uploaded over 180 different videos, and almost all of them are extremely unique in some way. From children opening their Christmas presents in 1991 to a whole wedding. However, almost none of these random videos are creepy or scary, with the sole exception of Jason sleeping. I highly doubt the owner of this channel filmed or acquired hundreds of random tapes just to sneak in one obscure horror video. So they're likely telling the truth about finding the tape, but if it's not an artsy horror flick, what is it? Now, while it might be easy to drum up some creepy stalker story, the real explanation might be a lot simpler. More specifically, this was likely recorded by a parent who wanted to observe the sleeping patterns of their child, maybe to see if they sleepwalk or talk during their sleep. Many comments under the video also agree with this explanation, with one commenter even providing a personal anecdote to validate this theory, stating, "I'm sure they recorded to catch him sleepwalking or talking. When I was 9, I woke up in my mom's closet. My mom about had a heart attack when she opened the door and asked me why I was there. I said, I don't know. She thought I was lying, so one night she videotaped me. But I didn't do it. It was a one-time thing for me. Also could be paranormal reasons. Kid been waking up with scratches, bites, could be anything. 9 times out of 10, there's really no creepy reason parents record kids. Not saying it doesn't happen now, but just way less likely. But at the end of the day, we really don't know and can't know the motives of this unnerving found footage. Maybe the channel owner's wish will come true one day and Jason, or the person who recorded this footage, will find this video and reveal the truth in the comments. In August of 2021, YouTuber Rich Aloha was filming one of his signature diving videos in a pool under a waterfall in Foster Falls State Park, Tennessee. He was excited to jump in the water in hopes of finding some treasure like a drone or an iPhone. But what he uncovered instead was a lot more disturbing. After looking around on the lake floor for some time, he saw something unusual sticking out of the ground, which turned out to be a GoPro camera. The GoPro had clearly been in there for a while, plus the outer shell had massive cracks, which allowed water to get in and fry every electronic component. But before Rich threw the broken GoPro away, he decided to remove its SD card and plug it in, just in case it somehow survived the months underwater. And to his surprise, it was actually fully functional and had the footage of the adventures of a young man. This turned out to be 22-year-old Richard Ragland, who tragically lost his life 2 years earlier, drowning while swimming beneath that very waterfall. In fact, the footage Rich uncovered had Richard's final moments in water. We can actually see him getting visibly exhausted and struggling to stay afloat near the end. The camera likely recorded his final breaths as well. However, from my research, the complete footage isn't available anywhere online, and even if it was, it wouldn't be something I could show here on YouTube. Rich likely never released the complete recording out of respect for Richard and his family, which I fully understand. And while the death of such an upbeat young man is sad, at least his family got to see his last happy moments on this planet thanks to Rich finding the footage. On the 30th of September 2019 at 4:06 p.m., the police in Anchorage, Alaska received a call from a woman claiming to have found evidence of a horrific crime. The woman who called the police was 47-year-old Valerie Kassler. She claimed that she was walking around Fairbanks Street when she found an SD card lying on the ground. She picked it up and saw the words "Homicide at Midtown Marriott" written on it and thought that it might be the title of some obscure horror movie. However, nothing could have prepared her for the horrifying content that came up when she plugged in the card to view its contents. According to the reports, the card had 39 images and 12 videos, all from the same crime scene of horrible things being done to a woman in a hotel room. The person behind the gruesome footage stayed off camera, but his unmistakable voice and distinct accent were clear in the videos. And while these videos were never released to the public, the person recording them would have sounded something like this.
There through those trees you'll see the doctor's house. He's like a heart surgeon or brain surgeon or something. There's the other neighbors, and there's the tree in front of the house, and there's the other neighbors.
This is the voice of Brian Stephen Smith, who quickly became the #1 suspect in the case. Apparently, he had called the Anchorage Police Department a few days before the SD card was found and complained about someone stealing his stuff. So when the cops were reviewing the footage, someone from the station recognized his voice. The person who found the SD card also recognized the carpet pattern of the hotel in the pictures. It was the Town Place Suites by Marriott, which was located just a 5-minute walk from where the card was found. Cops went to this hotel, and sure enough, Brian was checked into the hotel on the day the horrific pictures and videos were taken. Further investigation into Brian revealed that he was an immigrant from South Africa and had received US citizenship less than a year earlier. He was also working as the manager of a different Marriott hotel in Anchorage. The police also found the discarded remains of his victim during this time. Unfortunately, he had gone on vacation with his wife the day the SD card was found. However, he was arrested seconds after landing at the airport in Alaska and charged with over 13 felonies for his unspeakable crimes. Police also revealed the identity of his victim, the 30-year-old Alaskan native named Kathleen Jo Henry. Brian pled not guilty, but the evidence against him was too substantial for him to walk free. However, just as he was about to face justice, Valerie Kassler gave a testimony that could have complicated this case even further. If you remember, she originally claimed to have found the SD card lying on the road. In reality, she was hired by Brian as an escort. On her way out, she stole his phone. When she went through his phone, likely to clear it, she came across evidence of his monstrous deeds. But she did not want to get involved in such a massive case, so she copied the files to an SD card and came up with the entire found footage storyline. Fortunately, the case against Brian was already strong enough to withstand this revelation, and he was finally sentenced to 226 years in prison in July of this year. And while this would not undo the pain and suffering Kathleen went through, at least now her family can rest easy knowing that the monster who did this to her is rotting in prison. Suzanne Eaton was a 59-year-old American scientist who was working as a professor of molecular biology in Dresden, Germany. A big part of her job at this institute was to travel around the world and hold conferences on the latest developments in her field. In July of 2019, she traveled to the scenic Greek island of Crete for one of these conferences, not knowing that this was going to be her last, and that the person responsible for her end would be caught because of his videos on YouTube. The incident happened on July 2nd, when, after a conference, Suzanne spent time with her peers and played the public piano in the venue's lobby before saying her goodbyes and heading out to her hotel in the afternoon. Sadly, this was the last time anyone saw Suzanne alive. Her coworkers noticed her absence when she didn't show up for the second conference scheduled for 6 p.m. that evening. It wasn't like her to skip events out of the blue. Something wasn't right. A fact that became increasingly clear when over 24 hours passed without anyone hearing from her. So on July 3rd, her colleagues called the police to check on her, hoping she was simply sick or something similar. However, when officers arrived at her hotel room, no one answered the door. They acquired a spare key from the hotel management and went inside, only to find the room completely empty and undisturbed. All of Suzanne's belongings were also still in the room. The only things missing were her running shoes and a set of exercise clothes. Those who knew her immediately understood what this meant. You see, in addition to her academic prowess and piano expertise, Suzanne was also an athlete at heart. She was a double black belt in Taekwondo, and despite her age, loved going on a run every day. Knowing this helped investigators narrow down what might have happened to her. Put simply, she likely went on a run soon after returning to her hotel on July 2nd, and something went wrong after that. She wasn't super familiar with the area, and to make matters worse, the weather was uncomfortably hot that afternoon. There was a strong possibility she collapsed from the heat or something else along those lines. After putting this together, the Crete police immediately dispatched a search and rescue team in the area surrounding her hotel and around popular running trails. Her family even traveled to Crete and put a €50,000 reward for anyone who could help find Suzanne. Unfortunately, Suzanne was nowhere to be found. That is until 5 days later, on July 8th, when two young men were exploring one of the abandoned World War II Nazi bunkers scattered across Crete. Around 200 meters in, one of them noticed a piece of burlap covering something on the ground. They picked it up from one end to see what was underneath, and what they found was the aftermath of one of the most horrific crimes in Crete's recent history. The burlap was covering the bloody remains of Suzanne Eaton. A later autopsy report discovered that Suzanne had several broken ribs, multiple fractures throughout her body, a missing ear, and much, much more. Whatever happened to her certainly was not an accident. The investigators began searching for clues, and fortunately it didn't take long for them to make their first major breakthrough: a set of car tire tracks leading up to the entrance of the bunker. Analyzing these tracks allowed investigators to find the car responsible for transporting Suzanne's remains to that bunker. It belonged to 27-year-old Yanis Paraskakis, a local sheep farmer. But when questioned, Yanis feigned ignorance and claimed that him driving through that area on that day was nothing more than a coincidence. He went as far as to say that he didn't even know about the existence of that bunker, a lie that would eventually lead to his arrest. You see, Yanis had a dream to become a successful YouTuber. He started a channel with his own name in 2012 and began posting videos. However, if you go to his channel today, all you'll find are 3 videos of him performing an ancient Chinese martial art and meditation technique called Qigong. That's because a couple days before Suzanne's body was discovered, Yanis deleted every other video on his channel. And once authorities recovered some of these deleted videos, it became clear why. You see, most of these deleted videos involved Yanis exploring abandoned World War II bunkers, including the one where Suzanne's remains were discovered. This contradiction gave the authorities the go-ahead to formally arrest him on July 15. It also allowed them to investigate him further, and the evidence they discovered was overwhelming. As it turned out, the land where this bunker was located was owned by Yanis's family. Investigators also found traces of Suzanne's blood in his car's trunk. When confronted with this evidence, Yanis cracked and told the whole story. According to him, he saw Suzanne running down the road and something came over him. He hit her with his car twice before putting her in his car, driving to the bunker and ending her life there. He later changed his story to where he was compelled to commit this crime by a demon. Unfortunately for him, the jury didn't buy this one bit and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2020. Now, this should have been the end of Giannis's story, but from what I've seen, there's more to his actions than just this one crime he was convicted of. The thing is, Giannis presented his vile act as a crime of opportunity, something he did completely out of nowhere. However, there's evidence to suggest that Giannis might be a full-blown serial killer. For instance, he was apparently detained by the police twice before, once for arson and once for animal cruelty, both of which are well-known early behaviors of serial killers. After his arrest, several other women also came forward, testifying that he had tried to run them over with his car as well in the past. So, Suzanne was more than likely not his first victim. However, the most solid evidence against Giannis is in one of the deleted videos he uploaded to YouTube. In it, we can see him showing some very human-looking bones scattered throughout the same bunker Suzanne was discovered in. These bones were never discovered by the authorities, suggesting they might have been removed by Giannis to hide evidence. But what makes this truly disturbing is what his friend says at one point in the same video. This roughly translates into, "Is this where you left that old guy?" Insinuating that Giannis had disposed of one of his previous victims in the same bunker before. And if that is the case, one can only wonder how many other people Giannis has killed over the years. Simply Manic 6075 was a YouTube channel owned and operated by 24-year-old Samantha Wolford. She lived in the small community of Monticello, Texas with her husband Ernest Lee Ibarra, aka Ernie, and their 5 children. She usually made videos about her day-to-day life and other random topics. Her story began in 2008 when she was at the lowest point of her life. She'd recently become the single mother of a pair of twins and had no love interest in her life. That's when she met Ernie at a local tattoo shop, and the two hit it off right from the get-go, eventually getting in a relationship and starting a family together. In one of her videos, Samantha described the day she met Ernie as the happiest day of her life. Together, they were blessed with 3 more children, including 1 more pair of twins. Raising 5 kids was a challenge, but Ernie made it work by taking a second job in pizza delivery. So, while they had endured tough times together, Samantha, Ernie, and their 5 children appeared to be the perfect loving family. However, while being a stay-at-home mother was all she could do at the time, Samantha still had a dream of becoming a famous actress one day.
I've always wanted to be an actress. I think it is so much fun. I've been extras in movies. I've had small parts in like short films. It is so much fun and it is so beautiful. It is one of the most amazing forms of art ever to be able to express yourself that way. I think it's amazing.
So, in October 2010, she created her YouTube channel and started posting videos, hoping to become a popular YouTuber and fulfill her dream on the internet instead. And things were going surprisingly okay in the beginning. Samantha would post new videos whenever she had something new to say. And while most of her videos struggled to get past 100 views at the time, the few viewers she had were enough to keep her going. But as time passed on, her passion for making videos turned into an obsession. She started spending more of her time on making videos than her family, putting even more pressure on an already stressed out Ernie. Around 2014, she also started accusing Ernie of hurting her in her videos, hinting at just how bad their relationship was going. But then, after posting a seemingly random video in March of 2014, Samantha mysteriously vanished from the internet. Maybe she lost interest in YouTube or just wanted to focus on her family again. No one knew exactly why she quit so abruptly. Then, on the 20th of February 2015, viewers finally received the update they were waiting for. Unfortunately, it was far more tragic than anyone could have imagined. It started with the Texas police receiving a call from one of Samantha's aunts asking them to save her niece's life.
Cause County 911, what's your emergency? I have a home invasion. My niece is tied up. I am at the verge of untying my niece at this particular moment.
Okay, she's tied up.
She is tied up and gagged.
And gagged? Is that what you said?
Ma'am.
Is there anybody else there?
Where are the kids? We have 5 small infants asleep.
Apparently, 3 masked men broke into their home in the middle of the night and attacked the couple while they were asleep. The intruders then tied Samantha in her bedroom and after hitting him with a gun a few times, kidnapped Ernie. Samantha somehow managed to get her ties loose enough to call her aunt, who then contacted the police after arriving at Samantha's home herself. By the time officers arrived, Samantha's aunt had set her free from the restraints. The kids were fortunately safe as well. However, what made this whole situation strange was that the intruders didn't take anything else from their home besides Ernie. And from the people who knew him personally, Ernie wasn't the type of guy to make enemies with dangerous people. Put simply, investigators sensed something fishy with the whole situation. But all that paled in comparison to the main objective, which was to save Ernie as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Samantha didn't know anything that could give investigators their first clue. With no other option, the officers took Samantha to the station for further questioning, hoping to extract any useful information they could from her. But what none of them expected was that Samantha would change up her story completely after entering the interrogation room. Where before she didn't know anything about the assailants, now she had the name of a potential suspect, John Rebel. As Samantha's story goes, she was talking to her friend about Ernie's supposed attacks on Samantha, when suddenly a man with the pseudonym John Rebel overheard their conversation and started talking about how a man shouldn't treat a woman that way and that he was going to handle the situation. Well, as it turned out, the name John Rebel actually belonged to someone, a man named Jonathan Sanford. The police found and arrested John not long after Samantha gave out his name, right alongside his two accomplices, Jose Ponce and Octavius Rhymes. Surprisingly, Jonathan put up little to no resistance and immediately confessed to kidnapping Ernie. He also confirmed the worst possible outcome, that by the time the police got involved, Ernie was already dead. The three took him to a secluded forest and executed him with one shot to the back of his head. However, even after learning all this, one question remained. Why? Why would three men who didn't even know Ernie kidnap him from his home like that? Every answer to this question pointed back to Samantha, who kept denying any involvement. Even if the investigators ignored her suddenly remembering the perpetrator's name, there were several other suspicious aspects to her story. Like, how was she able to untie herself enough to call her aunt? Why didn't any of her neighbors hear the break-in? And why were the kids all sleeping in the same room, when usually they're scattered throughout the house? It wasn't long before investigators uncovered undeniable evidence of her direct involvement. This included instruction messages she sent to Octavius when the officers were trying to call Ernie's phone, which he had on him. These read, "Kill his phone, shut that down, ditch phone, move." There was no doubt about it at this point. Samantha was in colluding with her husband's killers. And as the investigation went on, the real story came out as well. Samantha had apparently become addicted to the idea of becoming a famous YouTuber, and her neglect of the kids became a constant source of fighting between the couple. But instead of resolving the issue like a responsible adult, Samantha colluded with her friend's boyfriend to hatch a cartoonishly evil scheme to get rid of Ernie. They first wanted to plant hard drugs in his car and get him arrested, but later made the heartless decision that taking his life would be much easier. There's also a chance that Samantha went with the murder plan because it would have brought her more attention on YouTube. She was eventually sentenced to 149 years in prison for killing her own husband, leaving her 5 children completely orphaned in the process. Diana Lovejoy was a successful technical writer living in the town of Carlsbad, California with her husband Greg Mulvihill. However, while her corporate job paid the bills, Diana's true passion was becoming a triathlon athlete and documenting her journey on video, resulting in her eventually starting her own fitness blog called Lovejoy Fitness and a YouTube channel by the name of Heavy DJ. She started this channel all the way back in 2008 and over the years used it to document various parts of her life. From meeting her parents after a long time to going scuba diving with her husband. At one point, she even tried to become a cooking show host of sorts.
Doesn't that smell nice?
Unfortunately, her channel never really took off, forcing her to eventually cut her losses and move on with her life in March of 2012. Or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. In reality, Diana's reason for abandoning her YouTube channel was kind of wholesome. You see, Diana and Greg had been trying for a baby for years by this point. Tragically, Diana had suffered 8 different miscarriages and was quickly losing hope. But then in September of 2012, the two were blessed with a perfectly healthy baby boy, marking an end to their struggle. However, what should have been a moment of celebration started a downward spiral of lies and betrayals, eventually culminating in an assassination attempt. Things started going downhill when just a few months after the birth of their son, Greg lost his job, leaving Diana as the sole breadwinner. The stress of the previous miscarriages, combined with the crushing weight of having to support a family in an extremely expensive city all on her own, spelled disaster for their marriage. It wasn't long before the two were constantly fighting with each other. Things escalated even further on July 9, 2014, when Greg returned home only to see a police officer waiting for him at the door. The officer explained that Greg wasn't allowed to enter his own home because, as it turned out, Diana had accused him of attacking both her and their son. What followed was a nearly 2-year-long divorce mediation, during which the investigators found no evidence supporting Diana's accusations, allowing Greg to get a 50-50 custody of their son. Diana was also ordered to pay $120,000 as a part of their divorce settlement in late 2015. But before the divorce could be finalized, Greg received a phone call from an anonymous number that changed everything. The voice on the other end claimed to be a private investigator Diana had hired recently. And according to this investigator, he already had solid proof of the attack claims Diana had made against Greg. But for some unknown reason, he wanted to help Greg win the case, so he claimed to have left the documents taped to a power pole located on a small hiking trail near Greg's home. Greg naturally found this whole thing pretty suspicious and decided to take one of his friends with him to the pole on the night of September 4th, 2016. Sadly, despite his suspicions, he failed to grasp the true intentions of the strangely helpful private detective.
Hello, this is 911.
Yeah. My friend has just been shot.
Do you know who shot him?
There's a guy lying down like a sniper.
A sniper? Did you see him at all?
Briefly, we saw the gun, and he shot at us like 6 or 7 times.
When Greg reached the pole, a sniper opened fire on him, shooting him clean through the chest. Fortunately, the bullet missed his heart by mere inches, giving him a second chance at life. By the time the police arrived, the shooter had already fled the crime scene. But a quick survey of the area allowed the investigators to uncover a pair of towels the shooter left behind. Running a DNA test on these towels led to a man named Weldon McDavid, Diana's shooting instructor. Weldon tried to deny any involvement at first, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, as after a thorough search, investigators were able to find another set of the same towels at Diana's place as well. They had also received CCTV footage of Diana buying the burner phone Weldon later used to lure Greg into the secluded area. Most importantly, investigators also found the gun Weldon used on Greg, hidden in the rafters of his garage. By this point, it was clear that Diana was the one who wanted to get rid of Greg, likely to avoid paying the divorce settlement and keep full custody of her son. Diana and Weldon were arrested for the attempted assassination on Greg Mulvihill and tried for their crimes in November 2017. Both were found guilty, with Diana sentenced to 26 years to life and Weldon to a harsher 50 years to life. The only silver lining in this entire case is that Greg was able to make a full recovery and is now living with his son. The Gunnar Runar 87 channel on YouTube seems oddly wholesome at first glance. It's owned by an Icelandic boy named Gunnar Runar Sigthorsson and contains a single 3.5-minute video of him confessing his feelings to the girl he loves. The title translates to English as My Confession to Hildur. In it, he says things like,
Hún án efa sérstakasta manneskja sem ég nokkuð tímann hitt. Ég verð svo ótrúlega glaður bara að vera nálægt henni. Það þarf ekki meira. Og þetta ætlað þér því að ég held ég orðin ástfangin með þér.
However, this seemingly heartfelt love letter turned out to be the key to solving one of the most horrific crimes in recent Icelandic history. And it all led back to Gunnar and the troubled life he had as a child. You see, Gunnar didn't have a mother growing up, resulting in him getting extremely close with his father. However, on the night of September 20th, 1996, when Gunnar was just 9 years old, his father decided to end it all using a gun. What made this already messed up situation even worse was the fact that Gunnar was in the room with his father and witnessed everything. Unsurprisingly, this took a heavy toll on Gunnar's mental health. He withdrew from the world and refused to accept his father's death as reality. Everything seemed hopeless for Gunnar. That is until primary school, when he met a girl named Hildur and instantly became infatuated with her. He'd admired her throughout school and into adulthood, but never found the courage to make a move, fearing he'd lose his only close friend. However, things changed in 2009 when Hildur got engaged to a man named Hannes. This gave Gunnar the push to do something about his feelings. But given his shy personality, he still couldn't confront Hildur directly. So, in March of 2009, he created a YouTube channel and uploaded his confession on there. Hildur never reciprocated his feelings, but the two remained friends. Even Hannes, Hildur's now husband, didn't seem to mind Gunnar's company, something he likely regretted deeply just a year later. It all went down on the 14th of August 2010. Hildur was invited to a party that Gunnar was attending as well. But things got a bit out of hand and Hilda ended up drinking too much and passing out. Given their closeness, the task of getting her home safely was handed to Gunnar. But instead of dropping her off at Hannes' house like he should have, Gunnar took her to his own home. By the time Hilda woke up, it was already morning. She was understandably furious with Gunnar and immediately called one of her friends to drive her home. But nothing could have prepared Hilda for the horrific scene she witnessed on the other side of her front door. Her husband Hannes was lying on the top of the staircase near their bedroom, submerged in a pool of his own blood. She ran outside and called the authorities. Sadly, it was already too late. Hannes had received over 20 stab wounds on his body, from his arms and legs to the back of his neck, and was long dead by the time Hilda found him. Given his condition, his death was ruled a homicide and investigators wasted no time in looking for the killer. And while they initially suspected one of his business rivals of committing this horrific crime, it didn't take long for investigators to find Gunnar's video confession to Hilda and bring him in for questioning. Gunnar denied knowing anything about it and was eventually let go due to lack of evidence. Fortunately, not all hope was lost, because not long after that, investigators found a bloody shoe print next to Hannes' bed. Looking deeper into this print revealed that it belonged to a pair of limited edition Adidas shoes. At the time, there were only 18 of these specific shoes in all of Iceland, and Gunnar just so happened to own one of these pairs. This was enough evidence to detain him once again. This also gave investigators the authority to do a thorough search of his belongings, resulting in them finding residue of Hannes' blood on his shoes, as well as in his car. Once presented with this evidence, Gunnar confessed to the murder. He also revealed that he'd been planning it for months, and even shoplifted the items he intended to use to avoid purchase records linking back to him. And while he didn't admit to it, Hilda also suspected him of spiking her drink that night, since she usually never passed out like that. After committing the crime, he also drove to a nearby pier and dumped items used in the crime into the sea to get rid of any evidence. It was a well thought out plan, since he was only caught because the garbage bag he used to hide his shoe prints tore open as he walked. As for his motive, it was just as everyone had expected, with him making it clear during the investigation, stating, "I loved Hilda. She was supposed to be with me. She was not supposed to be with him." Surprisingly, he was found not guilty during his first trial on March 1, 2011 by reason of insanity stemming from his messed up childhood. However, the prosecution argued that he was fully aware of his actions and escalated the case to the Supreme Court of Iceland. Gunnar was found guilty on this second trial and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. This was already lenient given the brutality of his crime, yet he ended up serving only half of that sentence as well. He was released under supervision in July 2019 and now works at a local warehouse.